week 4 of National Mentoring Month, hard to believe. And if you didn't catch one of the prior sessions, the first time we talked about things from a mentee perspective, how to find a mentor. The second time from a mentor's perspective, how to make the most of your mentoring capability. And the third on how to make the most of your mentoring relationship. Michelle will put a link in the chat so you can check out those recordings. Today is actually all about all of you. And we're here really to answer your questions. So I know some of you sent some questions ahead of time and we'll address those. And I know there's also a bunch of wisdom in the room as well. So please ask, share your questions, ask your questions, and we'll start with some of the ones that came in as we get started. If you have questions that you can think of and you don't want to lose them, put them in the chat. I will either look at them or Michelle will flag them for me. We'll make sure to cover them today. Okay, first question that came in is, what about measurement? How do you measure success of a mentoring relationship? So that's a great question. And I'm going to give you a very unsatisfying, it depends. Okay. I know that's probably not a surprise, but let me tell you why it depends. You want to measure success based on what the objective of your mentoring initiative is. So the first thing is, let's think about why is it that your organization is interested in mentoring in the first place? Okay. And then you want to think about measurement on a number of different levels. Okay, so let's start from the most micro level. Sorry, there's a little bit of noise overhead. Hopefully you can still hear me okay. The first level is the level of the individual. Okay, so remember that we've talked about in prior weeks that learning is the purpose, the process, and the product of mentoring, and you have to have goals. So you may look at goal achievement on an individual level. What are the percentage of people that have made progress on their measurable progress on their goals? And you want to get some quantitative and some qualitative information about what was that goal achievement and what difference did it make? Okay. Sometimes that's measured by, it should always be measured by self-assessment by the mentee and assessment by the mentor, but sometimes organizations will ask a mentee's supervisor to give feedback on achievement of those goals and use that for measurement. Okay, so lots of ways on the micro level for the mentee. For the mentor, same kind of thing. What sort of advancements or progress have they found in their own leadership capability? Have they found in their own engagement with the organization? Sometimes organizations will measure at the beginning, the middle, and the end of a mentoring initiative on a scale of 1 to 5. How strongly do you feel there's a future for you at this organization? And then they look at the mentoring cohort and how that's evolved over time. That can be really, really helpful. So that's sort of on the micro level. Then you want to think moving upwards towards the macro. What is the success as measured by the mentoring program? Satisfaction with the mentoring program. Okay. So what kind of support was given? Do people have, did they have the right training? Were the right resources available? Again, measured quantitatively. You can measure that quantitatively as well as qualitatively. So that can be really helpful. And also in terms of what percentage of mentoring pairs remain paired throughout the course of the mentoring period. And that's a great measurement because you look at retention, of course, but it also is a back-ended way to look at whether you as the mentoring, if you're administering a mentoring program, are providing support that can be really helpful. I will tell you from my own experience, our own experience at the center, there are dozens and dozens of mentoring pairs who we've spoken to who have said 3 months in, 4 months in, 5 months in, this isn't working. And we've been able to coach them into making the relationship not just work, but be really successful. And so that measurement of retention and kind of durability of the mentoring pairs can be a really great way to assess whether, if you're administering a mentoring program, you're providing the kind of support that would be helpful. And then moving up, you want to be looking at the impact of mentoring on the organization. Have you started a mentoring initiative to promote the retention of traditionally marginalized people in the workplace, right? And what, so that you can use that by some survey questions, but you can also look at some of the HRIS, HR information system data that you might have, promotion, engagement. If you have a little bit of longevity, right, you can look over time, have our engagement scores for women, LGBTQ, people of color in the workplace increased over time with the implementation of mentoring, or mentoring those who participated in mentoring versus not, right? What does that look like? So there are lots of different things to look at. Overall engagement scores, recruiting, more and more prospective employees, particularly Gen Y and Gen Z, are choosing their employers based on whether there's an investment in their development. So you can look with your talent recruitment team, if you have one, or put your talent development hat on if you also play that role among others, right? And say how often are people drawn to mentoring, and what sort of difference has that made? So that's sort of a touch and a taste, Erin, to your question about measurement. Anything else that's standing out for you in the measurement question? I know that there's probably a lot of questions about that.
That's really helpful. And, I'm thinking about this in the context of our employee resource group. So we have this champion network, and that's really where we piloted our first mentorship program. And so it was very successful. It was a 4-month program. We had 2 people that were actually promoted to directors. I mean, that wasn't the ultimate goal, but really what people said they walked away is that they felt more connected to the organization. So this is very helpful because we want to create this mentorship culture within the network. So this was very helpful. Thank you for this insight.
Yeah, you bet. Glad. So glad. Okay. There was also a question about marketing. How do you market a mentoring program? Excellent question. And so it depends on what your objectives are. But, I actually am a big fan of, particularly if you're in pilot mode or early in a mentoring initiative, of first of all, you want to make sure that there's somebody at the top who can be a real advocate or a sponsor for your initiative, and find out what their hook is, meaning what is their own experience with mentoring? Why do they think it's so important? And have them use the power of story and influence in marketing your mentoring program. That can be really, really effective. If you have a little bit of longevity, you can use testimonials. We have a client who we've been working with for 7 years. And after every mentoring cohort, they have people take out their phone and record a minute max of what it is that they learned, or why the mentoring initiative was, made a difference for them in their career at their organization. So that can be something you can use in marketing as well. When you market it, setting forth what the expectations are is really important. Now, some people shy away from that because they're afraid that it's gonna cause people to be reluctant to participate, because it's not going to be the kind of, hey, I'll wing it every time mentoring relationships that they might be used to. But we find that the retention, the engagement, and the results of mentoring initiatives are so much greater when you set those expectations out ahead of time. A lot of times, you take a lesson from sort of this, what you often see as sort of solopreneurs on social media who are doing, webinars to bring people in, right? Sometimes you see it like come for a free webinar and we'll hook you in and sell you, for $4.99 a course for whatever. There is a lesson to be learned when you think about marketing a mentoring program with that. And that is, if you can start out with something that's inspirational and informative about mentoring generally, right? Whether it's a celebration of National Mentoring Month, whether it's a keynote, whether it's, having past mentors and mentees share something and invite people to it. Depending on the organization and whether you're live, you may want to feed them. People love food, as simple as that is. And share it in a way that's informative, that gets people jazzed about mentoring. And then you can roll out what the mentoring program is, right? So you want to both gauge the appetite and whet the appetite for mentoring in general, and that will really help your marketing. The other thing is, when I think about what the difference has been between clients who have launched a pilot with great success and clients who have launched a pilot with mediocre results, it's continued communication in advance of the pilot and continued communication once you started to recruit the participants before the kickoff. So you might have this event and then launch a survey for people so that you can gather information about mentor and mentee. And you want to make sure bi-weekly at least to be communicating with people and reminding them to participate, reminding them to fill out the survey, letting them know that matching is being made so that you can continue that momentum, no matter how long the period is. Sometimes it's 3 or 4 months from the time you have a survey to the time you have a kickoff. Just continued communication can really help with the marketing. That's before launch. Once you've launched it, make sure that you are highlighting successes. Make sure you are creating places to create community among stakeholders, whether it's mentors, whether it's mentees, whether it's supervisors or managers of mentees. They can be a really interesting and important stakeholder where you're gathering information, testimonials, quantitative, qualitative data, and really sharing that can be really, really helpful. The power of story when it comes to mentoring is enormous. Using story as part of your marketing campaign can be super, super helpful. I'm forgetting where that question came in. Marilyn, does that answer your question? Anything else you want to know?
I just have one. It does. It's great. I have one more question in regard to that. Do you think it's better? What I'm doing is rolling it out to a different group of people. I'm doing management now, but I want to roll it out to people who could possibly be on a career path. Is it better to let the managers and supervisors make the recommendation, HR make the recommendation, or let the potential mentees step up on their own and use that as an opportunity to continue along their growth path?
I think a mix of that is probably a good thing, particularly if you're starting something new. The other thing that can be very, very helpful is people love to be invited to things. And there are people in your organization who are going to be great people to give you feedback, great people who will lean in and follow the structure. And by the way, you don't just want the positive feedback. You want people who are going to say, Marilyn, not working this way, and really to have that kind of conversation, mentor and mentee. So I'm a big fan of opening things up. You have a democratic process and you pick or you encourage certain mentors and mentees to apply because you know that they're going to be the ones who are going to give you feedback. They're going to be the ones who are going to evangelize for the mentoring program in the organization. Yeah, you bet. Okay, another question came in, and then we'll get to the ones in the chat about credentials. How do you know somebody is going to make a good mentor? Are there any credentials? I'm gonna, if I was a little bit younger, I would be labeling this kind of hashtag unpopular opinion. Right? So here's my hashtag unpopular opinion. I don't think that a mentoring credential is necessary or predictive of a good mentor. I think what is predictive of a good mentor is somebody who's curious, is somebody who is willing to be invested in the time, is somebody who has, it's interesting when I think I mentioned last week that I'm doing a lot of studying about trust in relationships. And there's this really great research by, I think his first name is Roger Mayer, about when you establish trust in others, you look at 3 things: your ability, your benevolence, and your integrity. Ability, benevolence, and integrity. And so this gets to the question of credentials, what makes a good mentor? The ability to show up for one another, the ability to listen, the ability to be curious, the ability to be able to take some perspective, right? The benevolence, right? The fact that somebody can be show up in a way that is really for the good of the mentee that they're invested in the mentee's interests and able to put their own interests aside. And then integrity, that they're able to show up and prepare, give the time, give the resources, do what they say they're going to do, and have the follow-up. I don't think and by the way, there are some amazing senior leaders in organizations who have been great managers and great leaders who make lousy mentors. And there have been some people who have been less successful managers who have made great mentors. So there is definitely some overlap in leadership competency, but it's about this willingness and a desire to show up, to suspend judgment. Having prior mentoring experience helps, but there are some great mentors who are new mentors. So I don't know that I have an objective,
It's not on here, but I don't know how to get that on.
I don't know that there's a simple, easy answer for the idea of a credential. I have yet to see a program to which I'm like automatically, yep, this person is going to be a great mentor, because there's some people who you go through a class and there's some people who are great at taking a class and answering a survey and getting a certification, who in practice might find that really difficult. By the way, this concept of, some people call it reverse mentoring. We've just coined a new term called complementary mentoring, where somebody more junior mentors somebody more senior, has proven to me that you don't have to have seniority to be a great mentor, right? You have to be a great listener. You have to be really curious. You have to be willing to lean in and problem solve together, but seniority doesn't necessarily need to be, what am I trying to say? There's not a positive correlation between seniority and excellent mentorship. So that's a great question. Okay, I'm seeing something in the chat. Let me just maximize my chat here so I can see. We're starting a mentorship program for our company, hopefully by the summer, says Kristen. We have a huge interest in this program, which is exciting, but a concern is burnout. Do you have any suggestions on ways to prevent burnout for a new mentor? Absolutely. So, there's a famous movie called Glen Ross. For those of you who are in the States, you may have seen it, where there's, Alec Baldwin is telling his real estate folks, ABC, always be closing, right? And I want to just change that in the mentoring context. ABC is always be connecting, not always be closing, right? So in order to avoid burnout, provide mentors opportunities to connect and to be in community with one another, to share best practices. By the way, I would say with one another and with you as the mentoring program administrator. So lots of avenues for support. Make sure, and they don't have to be substantive educational opportunities. It can be just connecting in community and in a social way, because it creates some accountability. It creates a place to vent. It gives them an avenue with a fellow mentor to be able to shoot the breeze and ask questions and get some guidance. And that can be really, really important. So I would say ABC, always be connecting, is a great way to remember to provide community for mentors and mentees. The other piece is, for those of you who were in some of our prior webinars, we talked about the negotiating phase and setting agreements. When you are helping mentors and mentees kick off the relationship, and you're encouraging them to set the agreements for their relationship, encourage them also to keep a door open for renegotiating. So it may be that a mentor has a mentee who's particularly needy, and the mentor has a period in their life where they're unable to provide the constant support that the mentee might need, or they are going through, somebody's going through something, right? And the terms of the relationship need to be renegotiated. Remember that model where there's two-way arrows in between each of the phases of the mentoring cycle. That's so you can move back to the negotiation phase. So between mentor and mentee, there should always be the ability to check in, see how it's going, see if our needs have changed, and what we might need to do in order to avoid that burnout. But the transparency is really important as well. So Kristen, is that helpful? Yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
That's
Good.
perfect.
Okay, another question came in just to me, so I won't share who asked it unless they want to identify themselves. This person asks, what are some strategies for balancing the confidentiality of discussions and goals set with the mentee versus the mentor's supervisor? So confidentiality of goals set with the mentor, with the mentee and the mentee supervisor. The mentee supervisor's goal might be different and may want more detail about mentoring discussions than you're willing to give. Yes. Strategies for tempering the expectations of the mentee supervisor who is expecting immediate impact, results, and achieving goals. Such a great question. Okay, the first thing is make sure that you are setting an expectation and understanding in your organization that mentoring is not remedial. What do I mean by that? That mentoring is not something that you undertake to be fixed. Certainly you undertake it to grow, but it's very different than coaching in that respect. Not that coaching is about being fixed, but very often supervisors will send their employees to coaching for a particular issue where they expect to get that report back. Mentoring is a very different construct, and confidentiality is really, really important. So the first thing to do is to set the expectations of what mentoring is with the supervisors. And that's why considering the mentee supervisors as stakeholders in your mentoring initiative is really, really significant. When you think about marketing the program, consider having a session where you share what is mentoring and what isn't, and what is your role as a supervisor. So setting that expectation up front. That's thing one. Thing two is about empowering the mentee to have conversations with their supervisor instead of triangulating. And so a mentor can do this, or a mentoring program administrator or the facilitator of a kickoff can help set this expectation. But let me add another scenario to this question so that we can help highlight it. So a lot of times this comes up with a mentee will say, you know, I should just really just talk to my a mentor will say, I should really just talk to my mentee supervisor because I know how to communicate with them. I think it will just help smooth the way. I think I can give them some feedback that will really help my mentee. And I always caution against that because part of the developmental opportunity is for the mentee to learn how to self-advocate and how to help negotiate the parameters of their supervisory relationship. So one thing to do might be for the mentee and the mentor to role play how the conversation would go between the mentee and the supervisor in terms of getting feedback, in terms of setting expectations. All else fails, the mentoring program administrator sometimes can loop back and reset those expectations, but it's always best to have that start with the mentee. The point that goals might be different is really significant because a lot of times the supervisor might think that the mentee should go in and work on something, and the mentee wants to do something entirely different, or the mentee's current role isn't in line with their career aspirations or helping them develop on their strengths or anything like that. And so protecting that confidentiality is really, really critical. And avoiding triangulation in those discussions is also equally critical. I hope that that's helpful. Are there certifications for mentorship program coordinators? I don't know about certifications. There's definitely all sorts of programs. Check out the International Mentoring Association on which I'm the board, of which I'm on the board. They've got some great stuff. And happy to have a dialogue with you about other resources for that as well. Do you know anywhere I can look for mentoring job offer ideas? So this was a private message. I'm not sure what you're asking. Give me some clarification in that same private message, and I will help clarify. I'll give you an answer to that question. What else? You can just unmute yourself.
Lisa, do you mind if I circle back to the conversation we just had for a second in regard to watching the triangulation and feedback to the supervisor? I do that, and I've done that from the beginning, but it's very generic. Today we talked about leadership. That's it.
Yeah.
So very generic, so they know the topic that was discussed, so that they can keep an eye out for, has there been any change? Do I see any improvement? How do you feel about that? And I do that after every meeting.
You do that as the mentor, or you do that as the mentee?
I'm the mentor,
You're
and
the
I send
mentor.
it to the mentee's supervisor, which they're VPs.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's generic enough, Marilyn, that it's not problematic. I think even better would be to, at the end of your mentoring meeting, to say to the mentee, what is the takeaway from this that you want to share with your supervisor? And have them socialize it with you, so you feel comfortable that it's in line with what you talked about, but it's also about their learning, and then use it as a laboratory for that conversation. So because they'll be a little bit nervous about what that muscle of that exercising that muscle in that conversation with their supervisor. So say like, okay, so how are you going to share this learning with your supervisor? Let's talk about what that conversation would look like, and practice it for the first couple times. And then it becomes a little bit easier and more facile each time. And have that be one of your agenda items, Marilyn, of, all right, what are you going to tell Joe, Jane, Julie, whatever, that we learned today, or that we talked about today? Yep. Perfect. Okay.
I like it.
Okay, previous sessions have been informative and I've enjoyed participating. My research focuses on mentoring as a powerful key success factor for women and minorities. My question is, do you believe there's a quality factor in creating mentor-mentee pairs that are of the same race and or gender? Again, here's an unsatisfying, it depends, Linda. Let me clarify that. Part is, what is the goal? Okay, so particularly if you identify with an identity that is not represented in the workplace, okay, and you want to understand what it's like to succeed as a person with that identity, it can actually be very helpful to have a mentor who shares that identity and can share their experience, and you can talk about that. So that can be really useful, and it can be an incredibly high quality mentorship pairing. Mm-hmm. I think that it also depends on what the organization's goals are. So organizations that are looking to increase the promotability, the exposure, the engagement, and often do this in connection with a sponsorship program. Sometimes they're mixed in as the same, although I still think that they're quite different, but they can be mixed in as the same. There's great value in matching across race and gender. And it's absolutely essential when that happens that both mentor and mentee are taught and comfortable with inviting a conversation about difference into their conversations. Because the worst thing that can happen is you pair across race and gender, and you tiptoe around or ignore, right, those differences in your conversations, and they become very surface level conversations where you're not creating those connections. So if you are looking to use mentoring as a tool for inclusion, and by the way, BTW, the studies have all shown that mentorship, more than any other diversity initiative, has increased the retention and engagement of women and people of color when you build that capability for conversations across difference.
That's very helpful. One of my concerns was, in many instances, there may not be a like gender or race. And so that doesn't mean don't reach out for a mentor.
Right, exactly. Building the capacity for allyship in your organization and for sponsorship in your organization, and most significantly for building cultural competency within your organization, which is how you make sense of difference, is an amazing, amazing thing. And I've seen it happen in mentoring relationships across difference in a way that I have not in other ways. There's one organization, I just love the story, and we talk about it a little bit in our book, where super senior person who had been in the organization for 35, 40 years and come up through manufacturing, but was now a senior leader, a straight white male, was assigned in a mentorship program to the most junior frontline role you could have in the organization. Was a manufacturing role. It was a young man who was first generation Mexican American and worked on had just become a line lead in the manufacturing, which line lead is not really a manager role, but kind of an oversight role for people who are putting the widgets together in the organization. And they were initially paired through the mentoring program, and each of them separately had come to us. We didn't do the pairing, but we had done the capacity building and the training. And they said, we don't know if this is going to work, right? The senior person had said, it's been 35 years since I've been in that role, where we don't really have much in common. And the younger guy was like, I don't know if I'm so intimidated, and I don't know if he's ever going to get me. And anyway, long story short, we said, go try it anyway. And they did. 6 months into it, we did some coaching. They were, trying to understand what happened. And the mentee had started to talk about how some of the rules in the manufacturing organization were holding him and his colleagues back. And the mentor said, wait a minute, I implemented those 30 years ago when I was in manufacturing. And he had no idea what the impact could be on the mentee. And we had given them some coaching, like, how do you talk about generational differences? How do you talk about cultural differences? How do you talk about the communication, gap here between levels in the organization? Anyway, long story short, this younger gentleman ended up doing some complementary mentoring. It ended up being more of a, back and forth, traditional and a complementary mentoring. The mentor learned so much and ended up spending time on his feet, walking around in the manufacturing organization where he hadn't set foot in 25, 30 years. The younger guy ended up becoming, getting promoted, which is not necessarily the goal of a mentoring relationship, but can be a nice byproduct of it. And it was such a mutually beneficial learning relationship across difference. But it wasn't until they started to talk about those differences that they were really able to get that moving. So it can be really successful. And to your point, Linda, the more you think about, we have to match people because of what they have in common, as opposed to because of differences, the better. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. If you are looking to get a job offer that allows you to do mentoring, there are a couple, which is a question that came into me privately through direct message here. There are organizations that have mentoring program administrators. Some of you probably are in that role. Often it's within the HR field. Sometimes it's within the learning and development field. More and more, it's within the diversity, inclusion, equity, and inclusion function in organizations, which is very exciting to see how that's happening. If you are talking about more of a supervisory relationship, as you are looking for leadership roles, asking organizations, what do you do to develop people? What are you doing to have a mentoring culture? How are you making sure that people have the capacity, the motivation, and the incentive to participate in mentoring in one way, shape, or form? Can be really, really powerful way to ensure that you are incorporating mentoring in whatever your job opportunities might be. The other, I think we talked early on a few weeks ago about the difference between mentoring and coaching. I can't recall, but I often get asked that question. There are organizations that have coaching departments, coaching functions within their learning and development team, and that can be a great way to take on a kind of a mentoring role too, but you have to be really cognizant of the difference between coaching and mentoring as well. I hope that's helpful Again, feel free to message me again if you want to go deeper on that question. What other questions have come up for you?
Just to tack on to what you just made, this distinction between coaching and mentoring, just to clarify, coaching is more performance-based. Is that correct? You're looking for a specific outcome?
Yeah.
With
coaching, yeah.
coaching?
So that's a great question, Erin. Thanks for, let me clarify that a little bit. Coaching is something, I like to say that all mentors are coaches, but not all coaches are mentors. So mentors use coaching skills. Coaching tends to be more performance-based. There is no inherent reciprocity in coaching. There is absolutely inherent reciprocity in mentoring. There is no inherent co-creation of the terms of the relationship in coaching. There is in mentoring. So the three real hallmarks of a mentoring relationship are learning, co-creation, and reciprocity. Learning, co-creation, and reciprocity. Okay, there's still plenty of learning that happens in a coaching relationship. I'm an executive coach myself. I really believe in the power of coaching, but it's a different hat. As a coach, if you were to hire me as a coach and say, Lisa, can you help me with a 3-year vision? I better come in with some tools in my toolbox for that 3-year vision, or you're going to wonder why you're hiring me, right? As a mentor, I don't necessarily have to have a toolbox. All I got to have is natural curiosity, where we could have more of a conversation about, all right, what are you thinking? Why is it you want to have a vision? Where, where you see yourself 3-5 years? What's possibility? I can bring some of my own, expertise and experience in a way that's a little bit different than the coaching relationship. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, what else? What are some of the pain points that you've been experiencing in your own mentoring initiatives or mentoring relationships that we can help workshop a little bit? Here's one that just came in. In academia, what is the best way or practical way to encourage faculty to participate in a mentoring program and learn what mentoring is all about, to distinguish being a mentor and an advisor? Such a great question. Thank you for asking it. So academia is a hard, it's ripe for mentoring. It has embraced mentoring in some circles, and it can be really difficult to distinguish between this role of mentor and advisor. So part of it is education, to encourage faculty to participate in experiential. I often think in mentoring, formal mentoring programs are really important. In academia, relying on the informal initially can be really, really helpful. So, for example, building capacity for mentees to approach potential mentors and ask for some mentoring, and establishing some education for potential mentors about the difference between advising and mentoring, or what does it mean to establish a mentoring relationship, right? Advising is some ways, we just had this conversation about coaching and mentoring. Advising, I almost put underneath coaching column, a coaching bucket, and mentoring, again, quite different. So part of it is the education. I also see in academia a little bit more blurring between mentorship and sponsorship than I see in a corporate context. So in the corporate context, there's a lot of more distinctions between what it is to be a mentor and what it is to be a sponsor. In academia, they blur a little bit more, because at least in my own experience as a non-academic working in some academic contexts, mentors in academia will help find scholarship opportunities, authorship opportunities, that kind of thing. And so really that education of what the difference of those things are can be really, really important. Let me just look at the question again and make sure that I've answered it. Because it was sent to me directly, I don't want to identify the person who asked it, but if you'd like to identify yourself and ask a clarifying question or shoot that back to me, I'm happy to elaborate.
Hi, it's me, Ida.
Hi, Ida.
And I appreciate your response. The reason I'm asking, because I work in an environmental, it's academic environment, and as you said, it's very blurry, the role of the mentors. as like a graduate faculty, faculty who have graduate students, and they're supposed to mentor them versus just being an advisor in their research thesis. And a lot of faculty at the graduate level, they could be from a different culture, and just bringing them, and they think, everything they know about mentoring is what they learned from their advisor.
Yeah.
So just to start the culture of mentoring and, making them understand what is mentoring is in academia and in US, sort of, without being, condescending or disrespectful to them. So I think that's an area that I am at least struggling with.
Yeah, such a great question, Aida. You know what it brings up for me is something, and I may have even mentioned this in prior weeks, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but some folks are new this week, so I think it bears repeating. There's a model about the 3 elements of career success called the PI model. It comes from a guy named Harvey Coleman. And he says that there's 3 elements of career success: performance, image, and exposure. Performance, how well you do your job. How good are you at your job? Exposure to people, resources, and opportunities. And image, how an organization views you. And when I hear you say things, Aida, like, not understanding really what the appetite or the need is, this is why the model, let me explain why that model came up when you were talking. So it actually turns out that performance accounts for only 10% of career success, how well you do your job, okay? It's table stakes. It's entry into the circle, right? You got to do a good job in order to get the rest. But I could do a amazing job, and a better job than somebody else who is known to others and has a great image within the organization, and not have the same career opportunities. When you talk about people who are coming from different cultures, what we know is that exposure and image are not equitably allocated. So we all have access to to doing our job well. I mean, that's actually arguable too, but let's assume for the sake of this discussion that we all have access to that same 10% equitably. Let's just assume it. I'm not sure that it's 100% true, but let's assume it for part of this. The other 90% we know for certain is not equitably allocated. So when you're looking at faculty or administration that doesn't necessarily reflect the students and the new folks coming in from a cultural perspective, they are going to gravitate from an exposure and an image perspective to people who look like them or who resemble them. So if you're looking to create an appetite for mentoring, creating some education around the fact that mentoring is about exposure and image, and to have a formal mentoring initiative will help create a more equitable academic environment, a more equitable institution, a more equitable culture within your organization, can really be a great key to getting some traction. That's a study by a guy named Harvey Coleman, Coleman, if you're looking for that, more information about that. Erin did a plug for my book, thank you. But also the book Inclusion Paradox, which is really terrific, on Andres Tapia, who's a personal hero of mine, wrote that book. So thank you for that recommendation, Erin, as well. You may have heard me use the quote, "Diversity is the mix and inclusion is making the mix work." That's a quote from Andres Tapia. Yeah, terrific. Other questions? What else is present for you? What are you wrestling with or trying to make sense of as you go about your own, creating your own mentoring initiatives, mentoring cultures, mentoring relationships? Asked differently, what were you hoping to get answered or to learn more about when you decided to join today?
I've found this to be all extremely enlightening and helpful. And we've done, we piloted a group mentoring program, which the group was really helpful because it was peer-to-peer mentoring. And then you also had someone higher up in the organization. And you touched on this earlier, sometimes it's the same people over and over again that are volunteering to be the mentors. And, talked a little bit about how to prevent burnout and how to help them support each other. It's just sometimes it can be challenging to try and entice other people or make it part of a skill that really you should have if you want to move up within the organization, is to mentor others and how to build a mentorship culture. And you've touched on that. It's just sometimes that's just overall can be really challenging to get other people to enter the arena and not just the same people.
That for sure, Erin. And there are always people who are so excited about it that they're going to jump in, and you want to encourage that, and you want to make space, and you want to make space for others to join as well. So one way to do that is to use, we'll call those first people your champions, right? Let's give them the name of your champions, is to enlist your champions in expanding the circle. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. We already talked about testimonials. That's great. What I would say is, because a lot of times there's a little bit of dead space after the end of a mentoring period before the next one, right? Is see if you can use that period and challenge your mentors, if they had a good experience, to do two things. Number one is to talk about it with others and encourage them to participate. Okay? Number one, talk about it with others and encourage them to participate. Number two, encourage them to start to create a mentoring culture within their own vertical and horizontal teams. Okay, how do you do that? Well, you tell people that you've, see number one, talk about your own mentoring experience, and ask people whom you supervise to become a mentor or a mentee and to share what their successes have been with you. As you evaluate people and you have your end of year performance reviews, ask them how they're learning. What are they doing to learn and develop themselves? Not everybody's going to choose mentoring as the developmental vehicle. That's okay. But as they're like, I don't know what to do, right? That's usually the answer. I haven't done anything and I'm not sure what to do. Share that mentoring is an option and give them some tips on how to participate in mentoring, whether formal or informal. And then the third thing, I know I said there was two, I just thought of a third one while I was talking, right, is to develop some informal mentoring relationships, right? So doesn't that sound funny? Here you are trying to have a formal mentoring program, and you're going to encourage your most ardent champions to have informal mentoring relationships as well. What happens is you start to create a mentoring culture where people start to realize the benefit of multiple mentors. And you will begin, it'll take a little bit of time, but you'll begin to develop an appetite for the mentoring program. So make sure to use those people who are always jumping in and give them the tools to participate and to contribute in those alternative ways. We probably have time for two more questions. How do you help encourage a potential mentor to participate when they don't feel they don't feel they have something to offer? Yeah. This is a really common question because mentors, we often assume that it's mentees who have the imposter syndrome. And yet it's often mentors who have the imposter syndrome as well. So the first and best way that I know of, Wendy, is to remind mentors that they don't have to have the answers. A good mentor doesn't come with the answers. A good mentor comes with the questions. And if they've got a natural curiosity and a desire to help, then that can often help, and to show up. Remember the ability, benevolence, and integrity, right? If they have the benevolence and the integrity, if they recognize that they have the benevolence and integrity, they'll doubt their ability a lot less. And they'll recognize that some of that, the ability doesn't mean having the answers. It means having the ability to show up for your mentoring partner. You can always tell them that if necessary, it can become a peer mentorship as well. But, I wouldn't start there. I would start with, if you have you might also say to them, one of the reasons I've approached you and asked you to do this is because I think you've got the natural curiosity and the desire to invest in somebody else's development. And really, those are the fundamental skills. And I'm here along the way to support you. So if you've got questions and you find that it's not working, there's no need to give up. There's no need to fear that you can't be there for your mentee. We're going to give you a structure. We're going to have support for you along the way and encourage you to get your feet wet. There are a lot of successful mentors who've never been mentors before. Identifying why you have suggested, why you think that they should participate, or why you've kind of asked them to volunteer, or why you were glad when you saw their name come through in the application, or what your impression of them is as a leader can help with some of that imposter syndrome. Okay, friends. Well, thank you all for joining. I will stick around for a little bit if you've got a question you want to ask in a smaller group environment. Thank you for joining. If it's for this, just for this one, thank you for joining. Let's see. Coaches and mentors are different. Mentors, learning, co-creation, and reciprocity. Those are the 3 hallmarks of the mentoring relationship for the person who just asked me that question. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your support and your interest in mentoring. Let us know if we can be a resource to you. Thank you for engaging in National Mentoring Month. I hope you are going out and creating mentoring cultures in your own lives and your own organizations. And be well. Enjoy the rest of your January. Thank you, everybody.